The moment he awoke, he gently began to sob. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to wake up. He was supposed to be dead. Instead, he found himself in a painfully white, antiseptic-stinking clinical bed in a tiny room under the migraine-inducing flicker of strip lights. Nothing hurt, though, at least right now. And he felt that it should hurt. It was like the pain was there. His mouth, throat, and belly felt wrong, but at a distance. A hand touched his shoulder in a perfunctory display of affection, a mechanical pat, and he realized that he wasn't alone. "Jake, I'm Dr. Ake. They told me you'd be awake soon. Do you need a moment, or can we talk?" The little man perched on the bed was a gargoyle of a figure peering with interest from behind thick, old-fashioned glasses. His body odour made its presence felt even over the antiseptic, and he was dishevelled and unkempt for a doctor, right down to his dirty nails. "Oh, I'm not that kind of doctor," he said, noticing the looks. "I simply have a proposition for you, if you're interested." Jake tried to speak, but all that really came out was a croak, a rasping sound like some comic book supervillain. A wheeze that took a moment to form a "yes." Ike smiled, though the expression did not look like it was used to being on his face, and it soon sidled off again in embarrassment when it realized that it didn't belong. "I work for the government on military projects. I'm a neuroscientist, a psychologist, and a pharmacologist. I'm working on forms of, weaponized psychiatry." Jake nodded slightly, taking in the rest of the room. As his eyes adjusted to the light, it didn't seem quite so bright or clinical. There was a coffee, or at least a coffee-coloured, stain on the wall, and an ancient television set into a folding mechanical arm. The out-of-order sign was so dusty and faded, he suspected that the last thing that had been on that screen had been an episode of Top of the Pops. If I may be blunt, and I shall be anyway, well, Jake, you're suicidal. You have no family, no parents, no children. You're in hospital because you were doing shots of toilet duck in an attempt to end your life. If you see no value in your life, might I suggest that we do? We need human subjects, you see, and they need to be disposable. If you're that keen on ending your life, I can assure you that that's a distinct possibility. Sound good? Jake just nodded, shifting to try and sit up, which made him feel pain even through the morphine haze. Excellent. Ike thrust a sheaf of papers and a pen towards Jake. "Sign these." Once that was done, Ike gave Jake a too-firm handshake, tucked the notes under his arm, and headed for the door. "Thank you, Jake. Mr. Bell here will keep an eye on you until you can be transferred." He hovered a moment by the door, half in, half out. "There's just one last thing. If we're going to be working together, you should know that I'm what a layman such as yourself might call a sociopath. I hope it won't put a dampener on our relationship." And with that, he was gone, only to be replaced by Mr. Bell, who had the body of a rhinoceros and the face of an elderly fetishist's freshly flogged buttocks. Jake, half wondering if this were a dream, closed his eyes and went back to sleep. It hadn't been a dream, and now here he was, scant weeks later, in another room. This one with all the minimalism of a Japanese hotel room and the charm of a late-period George Lucas film. This bed had straps, which was worrying. Ike was doing something complicated with a computer terminal, a centrifuge, and a hypodermic, while Jake sat in crinkly paper pajamas, waiting to hear his fate. "Doctor, what even is this experiment?" Ike babbled away while he worked, measuring, combining, in a manner that suggested even he might be capable of happiness. "It's an emotional inhibitor, a complex series of drugs working in tandem to alter your perception, to make your perception more objective, without compromising your moral and ethical processes. We've had some very limited success, but everyone so far seems to go mad for some reason. Not to worry, we've made some adjustments." Jake fidgeted, playing idly with the buckles on the bed straps. "Why would they go mad?" "Most people," Ike mumbled, decanting the mixed fluids into the hypodermic. Most people live their lives in a glorious state of delusion. Everyone has degrees of pre-existing bias, and many of these are very important to them. Strip away their subjectivity, and I suspect the world no longer makes sense to them. And why would you want to do such a thing? Jake swabbed his own arm where it was dotted with marker pen, ready for the injection. Can you imagine? Ike wrapped a rubber tube around his arm where he'd swabbed it and held the needle ready. Truly objective scientists, truly objective diplomats, truly objective military advisors, even soldiers? Police who could make truly rational choices about when to shoot under pressure and when not to. The advances in science alone would be enormous, and whole fields would have to be excised or rewritten, sociology for a start. The doctor sniffed arrogantly and then plunged the needle into Jake's arm. There. Much of these molecules are chemically similar to opioids, and you should be fully in state, as it were, in about 2 hours. Let me just strap you down, and I'll come back then. Seeing little reason to fight, Jake lay back, closed his eyes, and waited for the drug to take effect. The bright lights, he supposed as he opened his eyes again, were meant to simulate the sun. There were no windows in this block, so the light must be important. It could have psychological and health effects, so if they wanted a baseline, it made sense to reduce such stresses. The straps were not right. One was slightly tighter than the others, and now his hand was sore, to go with the throbbing ache in his throat and stomach that never really went away. How do we feel? Ike looked terrible. Jake was aware instantly of every imperfection in his face, every line, every wrinkle. He'd known Ike was psychotic, but he could see it now, immediately. Dead eyes, a mouth that could approximate a smile but never really mean it. This is interesting, Doctor, very interesting. You look terrible, by the way. I suppose I built up a certain image of you these past few weeks, but I see you now. You're just here for the job. It doesn't really mean much to you. Nothing does. Ike frowned a little uneasily. I see every pore, Ike, every line, every wrinkle, every detail in your face. Jake pulled slightly at his straps, staring at them left and right with curious intensity to take in the stitching and fastenings before he leaned back into the pillows. I feel every thread in these sheets, every imperfection. It's like I can see everything as it really is. No beauty, no blindness. Everything is filth and bacteria. Everything is slowly dying. All that stuff we deliberately forget every single day to get through our lives. Ike bent down and scribbled his notes with a biro on his notepad. The ball in that nib has a slight imperfection. The variation in sound is unbearable. That paper's recycled, rough. It's like sandpaper on my ears. None of this matters, but it's unignorable, and I don't feel the need to stay quiet about it. Ike made another feverish note and opened his mouth to speak. Breath wheezed in aging lungs, lips cracked, spittle stretched disgustingly, his meaty tongue twisted behind his yellowing, crooked teeth. Jake interrupted. The other test subjects killed themselves, didn't they? It wasn't a question. Ike's mouth flopped shut like a partially deflated paddling pool, teeth clicking, then contorted his face into a jiggling, fleshy noise box. Yes, they all did. The straps make it obvious, I suppose. That, and if I wasn't already at that point, I would want to. I know how insignificant we are. I know how pointless this all is. I know what you're really trying to do here, and I know that's pointless too. It's not going to work, Ike. Ike frowned and leant close, cheese wafting on his breath, his pulse audible as his heart sluggishly pumped that rancid stew he called blood around his veins. What do you mean? Objective soldiers? That was never your plan. Objective scientists? Perhaps. What you really want this for is governance. To control government. To make the best choices. It won't work. Ike leaned further forward. There was a thumbprint on his glasses, each viscous, oily line looming in Jake's vision like an oil-soaked cormorant. Why not Tell me. Jake turned his head away in disgust, but the faintly laundered smell of the pillow was little better. How do you think the ministers will react when you wheel out the amazing objective man? To begin with, they won't believe you. If I live long enough to be right, they'll get spooked. Each ideology will celebrate when I agree with them and ignore me when I don't. Nothing will change, except we'll have some certainty that if we'd only done things differently, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in. Surely we can convince them, man. Think of the good we can do. Ike was almost apoplectic, and he was lying. You don't care about the good, Ike. You're a sociopath, remember? You're into it for the fame. You think this is your ticket into history and a justification for your own inhumanity. You're not objective, Ike. You're unfeeling, and you haven't thought this through. Ike stepped away from the bed, twisting this way and that, chubby, filthy little meat tentacles clenched into nascently arthritic fists. There must be a way. Ike, the poor vote against their own interests. Governments ruin their nations in pursuit of ideological purity and cling to beliefs long after they're proven wrong. Rationalists and pragmatists have always been ignored. Why would I be any different? Why would you be any different? They'll kill me as a threat, and then they'll kill you. You know it. This is a miraculous dead end. It would be like being the only sober person in a car when nobody else will let you drive. It would be heartbreaking. Even for you. Ike's shoulders slumped and his head hung low. You know what this drug does. You know I'm right. The only way out for us is if the drug fails. You'll have to kill me. Humanity will just have to muddle through. Let them have their illusions and delusions, and let them hope for the best. If you know they're wrong, utterly, completely, it will only bring despair. Ike shuffled back to the bench and drew air into an empty hypodermic. You're right, of course. Of course. There was nothing else to say. If you like what I do here, please like, subscribe. You can find me on social media, on Twitter at Grimachu, James Desborough on Facebook, James Grim Desborough on G+. My main website is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. If you want to help me out with a little money, which will go to support my games, writing and other projects, you can do so at Patreon, which is also Grimachu.